Welcome, LA Progressive readers and listeners. Dick and I are happy, as we're always so happy. When I know that we're going to be speaking to Henry, I wake up with a smile on my face. Henry Giroux holds the McMaster University Chair for Scholarship in the Public Interest in the English and Cultural Studies Department and is the Paulo Freire Distinguished Scholar in Critical Pedagogy. His latest book is The Burden of Conscience, Educating Beyond the Veil of Silence. He is LA Progressive's associate editor. And his website is www.henryagiroux, that's GIROUX.com. Hey, Henry.
Hi, Dick. Hi, Sharon. Wonderful to see you both again.
So this time we're going to talk about your recent article, Death of Memory is the Death of Democracy. And as one example that's come up in the news is that the Trump administration, in all its wisdom, has identified 7 museums that it wants to whitewash, literally whitewash. That means remove all the truth and just have glorification of all the wonderful things white people did. And that's just one of a number of examples that you cite. Can you tell us about what's going on with this death of memory?
Well, I think that what Trump has in his regime has come to realize is that history is dangerous. And that to the degree that we understand that there are lessons to be learned in order not to repeat the kinds of injustices that marked the past and literally helped shape the United States, whether we're talking about slavery or we're talking about Jim Crow, or we're talking about the internment of Japanese during the Second World War, or we're talking about the anti-communist crusades. All of those issues are a really dark spot in American history. And I think that the issue here is how do you come to understand what it means, both in terms of how they shaped history and how they could be overcome. But I think at the core of what we see Trump doing is white supremacy on steroids. That's what we see here. And not enough people are mentioning this. This is not just censorship. This is not just a recognition that memory is dangerous. This is an attempt to basically eliminate, in the way that Noguchi would talk about, to implement a colonization of the mind in which people of color have no history, in which Black people have no history, have no way of learning how their history informs the situation in which they find themselves. So when he says, I think we've overdone it on slavery, what he's really saying is that we don't want to talk about slavery. What we really want to talk about are what it means to be a citizen in the United States without a history that would indict the kind of citizenship that we claim matters. And that citizenship is about white Christian nationalism. And anything that interferes with that, undermines it, or in a sense challenges it, has to be eliminated. I would argue, in light, and I'll end this, in light of your question, is this attempt to eliminate memory, eliminate history, rewrite it in the interest of white supremacy and white nationalism is the ultimate mark of fascism in the United States. It is the canary in the coal mine, no question. When you eliminate the history of people, you can talk about them in ways that suggest they shouldn't exist. You can take away their citizenship. You can make them stateless. You can basically say they're unworthy of public services. You can say, in a sense, we can ship them to Guantanamo. We can ship them to the alligator prison. All of a sudden, the question of disposability becomes more urgent because the question of dehumanization becomes more pronounced.
Absolutely. I try not to be the sky is falling. Was that Henny Penny? The sky is falling, the sky is falling. But I think we are in a place where things are dangerously close to breaking out into maybe civil war.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast this morning, and I can't remember whose it was, but the topic was that Trump is building his own paramilitary. And the intention, of course, is to use that paramilitary on the citizenry, particularly the citizenry that didn't vote for him. And so when you talk about the death of memories, the death of democracy, and the problem with history, The problem of history is that it's not taught, and we don't want it taught, because so much of what Trump is doing right now today parallels what has been done in fascist regimes in the past. But unless you know about the past, unless you know about these histories, it's you're not warned. What what is your experience, Henry, in your classroom with your students? What do they know, coming out of the secondary education?
Well, I mean, I'm lucky because I'm in Canada and students tend to be relatively literate. Um, and in some ways, as opposed to the United States, where I think a lot of students are really illiterate and
Yeah.
are trained to be illiterate. And of course, the public school system under Trump is now purposely training them in as laboratories of indoctrination to be illiterate. But they understand that history matters. I mean, there is a sense that you can't detach yourself from it, and that any attempt on it is, as you would suggest, and I'll speak to this, is really a move towards a police state, right? I mean, remember, there are two moments here that are interacting that we don't speak enough of in terms of how they're interconnected. One is all police states are marked by the overt show of force. And I think what we're seeing in the United States, we've never seen before, the US military actually being used in ways on American soil to basically police American citizens. That's unheard of. Except in under enormous acts, emergency acts and situations. The other side of that is the attack on consciousness, the attack on the ability to understand there are parallels in history that we need to learn from that are now in some ways being reenacted. And I must tell you, I just published a piece today, a long piece that hopefully you'll reprint in Counterpunch. And I use the word domestic terrorism.
Mhm,
I say what we have here is domestic terrorism. And you and I, both of us, we've talked about this before. We need a language that adequately captures the nature of the violence we find ourselves in. And so when you say, and actually I agree with you, Sharon, I think that Trump wants a civil war.
mhm,
I think that Trump is just waiting for a certain level of protest to emerge where he can unleash the military on these protesters and enact an emergency state of sorts in which he can consolidate power more and more. I mean, this is a guy who said the other day, the American people want a dictator.
Right.
Literally said this. I mean, and now he's talking about occupying Chicago. He's talking about occupying. What are these cities? These are predominantly black cities.
mhm.
These are
Right.
cities that are dominated by Democratic governors. I mean, this isn't a coincidence, but I think the thing that we really have to understand is Stephen Miller. I mean, Stephen Miller channels Goebbels.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm,
There's no question. He looks like Goebbels. He channels Goebbels. This guy is an unadulterated racist.
mhm,
It's all, just look at his history. Just look at what he says about black people, about racism. I mean, think about the speech he gave the other day when there were protesters protesting him going through Union Station in New York City. He said, "Oh, these are old people. They should go back to their beds. They're just wearing diapers. And who are these people? They don't belong. As a matter of fact, I'm glad to see them because we will just get more and more police to take care of them." My God. I mean, it's almost as if we're on another planet in terms of the force, the racism, the hostility, the concentration of power, and the eliminate of all checks and balances. The checks and balances, even in a democracy as weak as this, are gone. Congress is not, in the future, you want to hope we have Nuremberg trials.
Right.
Because if we do, they will go to jail, these
Right.
people. If we
Well,
do, that Supreme Court will go to jail, except for the three liberals. They'll go to
Right.
jail. I mean, they have actually justified sending people to countries that they were never born in without due process. That's a war crime. And to make it go even further, the other day a picture was posted on Twitter, on X, of a number of people surrounding Netanyahu. Three Democrats, Major Schumer, the guy who heads the Republicans in Congress, standing behind a war criminal. Over 68,000 people killed in Gaza. And we're going to look to the Democratic Party to basically save the United States from being basically invaded and ruled by a police force that is largely constituted by the military? I don't think so. I mean, the only good thing that's happening here, and I'll end, is that people are protesting all over the country. All over the country. There are massive local protests that get no media coverage, none. And then there are people like you and others who are really raising the alarm in multiple ways, in multiple media outputs. I remember Edward Said saying once, intellectuals have a responsibility to basically use their talents in every form of media that exists. Op-eds, digital platforms, anything to raise consciousness, because without raising consciousness, if you don't understand the problem, I don't care how severe it is, you can't address it. You
That's
can't
right.
act on it. So for me, we live at a time when the crisis of politics is not matched by a crisis of ideas. Never has culture been so political, so important. The war is being waged on the cultural front. The repression is obvious. But if people don't understand this and can't collectively act, we're doomed. It's over. I mean, we have, I'm reading liberals now and Substack, oh, we're in fascism. We've been in fascism for a long time, since
Yeah.
2016 at least, right? I mean, and all of a sudden, can you imagine 10 years later, we're finally saying that fascism is here when many of us have been talking about this for 20 years?
That's right.
Fascism under Bush and 9/11 was not invisible. Remember
Right.
black sites? Remember torturing people? Remember abducting people and putting them on ships off the coast so you could basically interrogate them? History is repeating itself only with a vengeance.
That's right. And of course, there are some communities that have lived with fascism forever. So we have had fascism that was not equally distributed across the
Right.
United States since its inception.
I mean, I think one of the things my good friend Robin Kelly, whom we both know, I'm assuming, fascism doesn't begin in Europe in 1933. It begins with the Ku Klux Klan. I'm
Right.
sorry. That's when fascism really begins in America. So let's be honest about it being homegrown and how it basically has fermented under neoliberal capitalism, which basically destroys any sense of social responsibility and puts inequality, economic and political inequality, on steroids.
So, to return to your thoughts about Stephen Miller and Goebbels and Nazis, your article points out, as you said, in 1933, the Nazis had a book burning party where they piled up books by Jewish authors, socialist authors, anybody whose ideas they didn't want, and burnt them. And now under Trump, we're having the same thing, and DeSantis and other right wingers who are banning books. And one of the books they're banning, or one of the authors, is James Baldwin. And I was thinking about that in preparing for today's conversation. And one of the books that I remember from high school, I mean, how many books do you remember from high school? But I remember Another Country by James Baldwin that was assigned to us. And then I met him a couple of years later at Columbia. I don't know how profound an effect that one book had, except I did, as I do with authors, if I like one, I read them all. Did the same thing with Toni Morrison. And now young people are not even going to get a chance to get their hands on it. They're not even going to know about it. And you're right, American educational system has been morphed into educate the wealthy and make the rest ready to line up for Walmart jobs. You can see it everywhere you turn, and it's a horrible shame.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that. I've been writing about education for 40 years. And I'll tell you, if you look at the development of the way in which different forms of educational repression emerged, at first the argument was, do you educate for work or do you educate for democracy? That was an argument in the 50s and the 60s, right? Then the argument became, no, we really educate people for the test. That we don't need you don't need social sciences, you don't need liberal arts. And that was the Obama stuff, Clinton stuff, right? They were really dumb around education. But now we have something else. Now we have you educate for indoctrination.
Mm.
That schools are not laboratories for the work, training people for the global workforce. Irrelevant, because AI will take care of that. What we really have now is schools are laboratories of utter indoctrination. You wipe out forms of critique. You wipe out any kind of critical consciousness. You wipe out any kind of history that matters. You wipe out any attempt to address social issues. You claim that critical race theory really divides people. You claim that it's all woke, this stupid word that anybody who uses it has to have their high school diploma revoked. So it's really worse. But what's interesting is that, remember, when we talk about education, the left made a terrible mistake. It always believed it was about schooling. And it never understood that it really wasn't just about schooling. It was about the media. It was about these cultural apparatuses. It was about the disimagination machines. They have taken over the country. The 5 companies own 95% of the media. As you mentioned, basically, about the concentration of media, Sharon, in your piece. 5 companies, right? So that what we have now is a level of manufactured ignorance that so surpasses the Nazi book burning. I mean, that looks like something we should learn from in terms of the fact that it was associated with real Nazis, right? But what we have now is we have this concerted attempt to take away the possibility for people to have a voice in which they can narrate themselves. This is an attack on a notion of agency in which people are capable of narrating themselves, capable of understanding the limits and the possibilities of their own agency as it's linked to knowledge, to ideas, to judgment. You don't have a democracy without informed citizens, period. And they know this. And they know this. And that's exactly what they're after. It's actually more than simply racism. It's an attempt, in a way, to glorify all the kinds of educational institutions, outputs, platforms that would essentially be in control of a dictator, whether we're talking about Franco, whether we're talking about Pinochet, in which that stuff can be mobilized to impose what I call a kind of dictatorial silence, in which the notion of critique basically becomes criminalized. That's domestic terrorism.
Yeah, well, to me, it's so clear the path that we're on, but I often wonder, would it be clear if I hadn't read 10,000 books? It's clear because I have studied history and I see it replaying out daily. I got up this morning and to find out that FEMA, dozens of FEMA workers have been put on leave. And that dozens of CDC workers have walked out. And of course, I mean, Trump does this. I suppose there's a method to his madness and engaging in such outrageous behavior, is that it takes our eyes off of all of the other things that are happening, like the prices going up because of his tariffs and so on.
I think more than a politics of diversion. And I think that we really need to be, I mean, this is my view. I think we need to be careful about this argument because the argument sort of goes like, well, he's talking about this, he's changed it to that, he's fired the CDC workers, and now he's done this, and now he's going to eliminate FEMA. The real question is, what connects them all?
Mm-hmm.
That's the real question, right? And what connects them all is a fascist regime, the building of a fascist regime. Now, remember, central to fascism is a very specific understanding of government, and that government is never linked to social responsibility, never. That government is a tool of the ruling class. I'm sorry to have to use this term, but let's be honest, right? That government becomes a tool of the financial elite. This is capitalism on steroids because now it no longer says, hey, look, we have to put checks on capitalism like Schumpeter, right? And go so far, or even Reich. Reich is a nice guy, but he gets it wrong. I don't want to save capitalism. I think it should be eliminated. I don't think there's anything in it that should be saved. But I think that what we're seeing here, in the past, remember the old argument that government should be sort of put down the toilet and and disappear. Now, what we're seeing is that any notion of government that has an actual relationship, the questions of social responsibility, that's the issue, should be destroyed.
Right. And so another way of saying that is that government should not exist to serve the people. This notion of the people, by the people, for the people, that is absolutely an anathema to what Trump is trying to do, which is privatize and put the reins of control completely in the moneyed elite.
Absolutely.
So the reason that the people exist is really to extract from them, extract their labor, extract whatever little wealth they have, just take.
I mean, there's something going on here that we need to understand, and that is, the old Marxist notion that if the objective conditions become too extreme, that people will basically revolt, right? And there was a certain kind of overdetermination to that placed more faith in workers than they should have. The fact of the matter is, workers won't revolt until they understand what the nature of the problem is. But at the same time, the objective conditions are becoming so cruel, so overwhelmingly fascistic, so overwhelmingly exploitive, so overwhelmingly naked in terms of the attempt on the part of Trump to exert and build the kind of executive power that basically punishes people. 11 million off healthcare. People will not have enough food to eat. Healthcare will basically disappear. Social provisions will disappear. This is the time for a new party. We really need a workers' party. We cannot rely on the Democrats. They're useless. They're cowards. They're people who are wedded to Wall Street. They provided the conditions in the first place for Trump to come to power. And I think that where we have to begin is with unions that have a national reach. I mean, whether we're talking about teachers unions, we're talking about auto workers, we're talking about coal miners. I mean, the conditions now, look, think about this. I mean, not to get too worked up over this, but you have thugs masked walking around the streets asking people for papers who are getting off the subways. You have these thugs marching into sports fields arresting 15-year-olds. You have them in courthouses waiting for people to attend immigration courts and are being arrested. I mean, how close do you have to get to fascism to realize where we are? And I think it's at this point that you really need to take direct action. I mean, let's get away from the stuff that, yes, it's great that some elections are taking place that are putting power in the hands of Democratic legislators, but that's not the end game. The
Absolutely.
end game that you're going to shut the country down. If university professors all across the country said, "We're gone, we're out, we're out until this, we're out," let me tell you, things would change. If teachers all across the country said, "That's it, we've had enough, we're going on strike for every other week." If the dock workers said, "We're not processing anything." You know how long, if the United States said, "We're not giving Israel arms anymore to kill children," the war would end in 2 weeks. So it seems to me we need to think in terms of systemic politics in order to attack systemic issues. That seems to me to be the key. But look, we have a generation of young people. They're alive. I mean, yes, some of them don't know their histories, but they know that they're being written out of history. They certainly know that. They know they're not going to have jobs. They know that if they protest, they can end up in, who knows, El Salvador. They know injustice when they see it. There are some groups that are stupid and believe that Trump somehow is the savior, but you have to discount those people. I think the vast majority of young people are on the move internationally. And I think that there's hope there, and we need to nurture it with education, with a constant visibility that makes clear that we are in a state of fascism. We have tilted over into the abyss. This is not any longer speculative.
Yeah, I mean, the danger is we get accustomed to it, and it becomes every day,
right.
everything. And these young people, I mean, they don't know the 60s and the 70s, but I'm the glass half full guy among us. And it seems that if Trump and his minions push this far enough, there may actually be pushback. And I've resisted talk about third parties or new parties because I didn't think they would ever happen. But this might be a time that something like that could happen. And I think, as you say, it won't come from the political culture so much as the labor culture and
That's
the
right.
organizational culture,
Right.
who will come to the fore and lead us into a better place, I hope.
Yeah. Well, so between the two of us, Henry, obviously Dick is always talking about how he's the half full guy. I believe
I'm the white guy, so that
yeah, right,
that
right,
goes.
right. So But I believe that this notion that there was hope that this two-party system could provide an answer, I think that that is as much of a contributing factor to us being where we are today as anything else.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you entirely. I mean, I don't see, except for some elements on the left end of the Democratic, Bernie Sanders is a brave guy. But he's part of the Democratic Party. I mean, he has, he can preach all he wants, and they just ignore him. And AOL, which, everybody, and she's smart, but they seem unwilling to do two things. They seem unwilling to acknowledge that capitalism has to go, and they seem unwilling to recognize that in their party there's no hope. I mean, look, the young guy who's running for the mayorship of New York, right? Mandani. Do you believe these Democrats won't vote for him? They don't. They're not. They're going to support Como. What? I mean,
Wait a second. Did you think they would support him? Did
no,
you think
I did.
they
No,
would
no,
line
no,
up
no,
behind
no.
him?
I never thought they would support him, but I think it's wonderful to see that contradiction emerging in
Right.
ways that it completely eliminates their appeal. I mean, they make the claim that they're against war. They're against poverty. They're against injustice. When in fact, as I've said earlier, they're wedded to Wall Street. They've always been wedded to Wall Street. I mean, when people like Hillary Clinton becomes a spokesperson for justice, I mean, I'm going to throw up.
Yeah.
When Bill Clinton or Obama, are you serious? I mean, the archangel of neoliberalism is really going to tell us how to deal with fascism. He's going to say, let's not go too far. Let's keep the lid on. Let's make sure we don't cause violence. I mean, let's be nonviolent and passive. Let's do everything and give speeches by people who basically are not politicians, but who want to be celebrities. It's not the issue. The hard work is among workers. The hard work is among people who are in trouble. The hard work is among young people who realize they're being written out of history. That's the hard work. And that's got to be done. But it's not going to be done unless there's an educational element that basically is at work doing what you suggested, educating people to history, revising memory, making it clear that people can make a change, recognizing, as you did in your article, why the U.S. isn't a democracy, what the key points are to be able to say, look, Kansas should not have as much power as California. I'm sorry, the Electoral College is an undemocratic institution to protect white men. That's all it was. And I think that these issues have to be hammered home again and again and again.
That's right. Well, Henry Giroux, we've come to the conclusion of another exciting conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, and we look forward to talking to you again. Name of the piece is Death of Memory is the Death of Democracy, and we've published it at the LA Progressive. We want to encourage anyone listening to this to please share, please subscribe. Democracy is really at stake right now. We've got to support independent media. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
As always, you were on fire, and we appreciate it a lot. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.